Hmm. Hello and welcome back to Excel at Excel. My name is Bruce Gates, and in our last tutorial we looked at formatting. Formatting was a way to not only make our data look nicer, but also it helps us make the data a little easier to get to and to look at, and helps our workflow a little bit. In this episode, I want to talk about leveraging your data, which is more focused on your workflow and making things more effective and efficient. So the first thing I want to do is to add a column. Now, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks with that real quick, but it's pretty simple. To add a column, you would simply click, for example, here on this column where I want to add one. You left click right on the letter here, and then right click and click Insert, and you get a single column. Now, if you wanted to insert more than one at a time, you could select multiple columns, like two here. All I did there was left click and drag. Right click and click Insert, and now you get two additional columns. So here's the first one I added, and then when I added again, I got these two. I only want one column for this particular exercise, so I'm going to undo that again with our favorite shortcut, Control Z. You can also click this up here, which is undo as well. You can also redo, which I personally don't use all that often, but some people do, I guess. But again, remember that undo is probably your favorite and most used shortcut in almost any program, Excel definitely included. So back to what we're doing here. What I need to do is I need to add a type column, and you'll see why in a little bit. I also need to add some rows because we want some more data to leverage besides this, and I want to maintain this total here just in case we decide to use it later. So I'm going to left click this sixth row here, and just like I did for the column, I'm going to right click and then click Insert. But I don't want to keep doing this time and time again because I don't have all the time in the world to be adding one after another after another. So what I want to do is, let's say I want to add four rows, I should say. I'm going to left click the sixth row, hold Shift, and then left click the ninth row, and then do the same thing. Right click and Insert. And now I get four extra rows to deal with. And I think that's going to be sufficient for this exercise. So now I'm going to start adding some other data. And these are all fruits, obviously. Let's start adding some other types of items. Let's do some vegetables, like some broccoli, some cucumber. Let's do, I don't know, some squash. Let's do some other stuff, too, like some milk and butter. And let's do some Pop-Tarts. Why not? And some muffins and some cake. And that should be good enough. And for type, we're going to start categorizing these. Basically, what I'm doing here is I have my items. I'm going to categorize them by where they would be in the grocery store, and then we're going to fill in this information with, again, probably some bogus information. And I'll show you something interesting about this particular column as we go through, but we'll get to that in a second. So for bananas, they're obviously a fruit, as are apples. Now, the nice thing about Excel is you can see here as I start typing, it knows that there's a similar entry above it. Now, if I were to do this lower down the list, it still works. Handy. So it doesn't always work. I found sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think it depends on the formatting of the cells, but long story short, you can just type F in this case, hit Enter, and it will autocomplete for you as long as you want to use fruit. Now, if I did something else and I had, I don't know, like, I don't know what I would put, but like funkiness, and I went and hit F, it doesn't know what I want to use because there's two F names in this list. So I'd have to type the next one, and it would know what to do, whereas if I type U, it knows to use funky. Anyway, we're not going to use funky because oranges might be funky, but they're mostly fruit. Broccoli, however, are vegetables, and if I could spell them correctly, that's how it would look. And again, I could save time just by typing V. Milk is a dairy item, and so is butter. Pop-Tarts we're going to list under treats, and we're going to do the same with muffins and cake. Now, we're running into the same problem we had in our first tutorial where our data is being cut off. Like we only have cucumber instead of cucumber. And our vegetables is going over into is going over into the quantity column. So if I start typing in numbers here, all of a sudden it just says vegetable and no E at the end. So we need to fix that. So what we're going to do after I just put in some random numbers here, again, that doesn't really matter. This is just for the sake of example. we're going to use the tip that I showed you in the previous tutorial, where I'm going to left-click these two columns because they're the only ones that are having this particular issue. I'm going to bring my cursor until it looks like this next to any of these columns. Again, it doesn't matter which one. For this, I'll just show you for the sake of it. You can do it in the middle of the two columns, but this is the cursor and how it needs to look. I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see. You want to make sure your cursor looks like this. And then you double-click with the left mouse button, and there you have it. So that's all there is to that. Let's just go ahead and add some data here. We're just going to put 50 cents, $1. Now you'll see right away what I was starting to talk about, which is as I'm entering this data, it remembers the cells format from above. So what I mean by that is when I insert a row or a column, it copies the formatting from that column. So even though you're not seeing these formulas, it knows that when I enter data to copy essentially the same type of information over. That probably sounds more complicated than it is, but basically, long story short is when you enter or add a row underneath another row, it will go ahead and copy the same formatting to that row. So if I go ahead and add another row here, for example, well, actually, here's a good way to demonstrate this. If I highlight this row with yellow and I insert a row, you'll see what happens. It makes this row yellow. It doesn't matter what color I make it. If I make it yellow, orange, green, blue, it doesn't matter. If I insert another row, it's going to copy that formatting of the cells above it. Now, we don't want to do any of that, so I'm going to undo all of that. And another handy shortcut that you might want to use, especially if you're doing a lot of edits at once, is to save often. So to do that, you can either do File, Save, obviously, or Save As if you want to save a copy to maintain the data, you know, in case you do something and you want to go back to a previous version. Not a bad idea. There are ways that you can do that without having to save copies that we'll get into in later tutorials, but that's a whole other can of bees. But the shortcut is simply to hold Control and hit S. I believe on Mac that would be Command S. Sort of like undo on a Mac would be Command Z. Basically on a Mac, you substitute Command for Control, and Alt, I believe, is Option on Mac. I would look it up just to be safe, but I'm pretty sure that's usually a pretty good rule of thumb. So anyway, we're getting a little off topic here. The next thing that I want to show you is that you can now sort and filter. And sorting and filtering is really where Excel starts to get a lot of its power, because you can start to just drill down to only see the information that you care about. So in this case, for example, let's say I want to only see, or let's say I want to put these in order of what type they are, and then, you know, alphabetically what type they are, and then sort the rest by alphabetical order. So, you know, I want all my fruit to be together, then all my dairy and all my treats, but I want all of those categories to be in alphabetical order, and then under that, I want all of the fruit to be in alphabetical order, all the dairy to be in alphabetical order, and so forth. So in order to accomplish that, you would simply select all of the data you want to sort. In this case, I'm not selecting the total because I don't want to sort that as part of it. If I do, because they don't have any item or type or anything like that, it's going to sort of mess up the sorting. So you really just want to sort using the header, which is what this would be called. These are headers, and this is the actual data. You can do it without selecting the headers, but I'm going to show you why in a second you do want to select the headers. So I'm just going to either left-click and drag from one corner to the other, or you can simply click the first one, hold Shift, and left-click the other one. From there, I'm going to go up to Data and Sort, and we get this screen here. Now, there's a lot of things you can do, and this is a pretty powerful little tool in Excel. Now, right here, you'll see it's checked off My Data Has Headers. That's exactly what we're looking for. Our data does have headers. If you didn't have this selected, you would have to manually select which columns you want to sort by. And that's not necessarily a problem, but if you have a lot of columns in particular, that can get very tedious and very confusing, quite honestly. So I like to use headers, and I like to select this as an option because then you don't have to remember which column is which. It just gives you the option to choose. So in this case, we want to, as I said, we first want to sort by type. to get all of the types together, and we want to put them in alphabetical order, which is what this is here. There's other options here, such as the color, the font color, etc., etc. Those are more complex things that we'll probably get to later. But for now, we just want to sort by type based on the values of the cells and in alphabetical order. Then we want to add another level, so sort by this and then by that, which means first sort by this, and then after you're done sorting that, sort by, and we want item, and to do the same thing, sort in alphabetical order. So now notice how this data looks now, and if I click OK, all of a sudden the dairy comes before the fruit, and then the treats and the vegetables. So that's in alphabetical order, and each category is in alphabetical order, which is pretty handy. Now we can do even more with this, which would be to say, and you'll notice that our total didn't get messed up. All of this data didn't get messed up. If I were for some reason to select just the bananas and the cake and all this stuff and do the same thing, watch what happens. I get yelled at, and it says Microsoft Excel found data next to your selection. Since you have not selected this data, it will not be sorted. And it gives you the option to expand the selection, which is essentially what we did in the first example, or to continue. I'm going to show you what happens if you choose continue. Notice the prices and the quantities and all that. And we're going to just sort on item, just for example, and look, it only sorted that column. The problem is that now it breaks all of the relationships you had across the row. So each row could be considered a record where, you know, apples or fruit with this quantity and this cost and this extended cost. But if you sort only by a certain column, you're going to break that relationship because now it's saying that cake is vegetables. And as much as I'd love that to be true, it's not. So we're going to say Control Z, and we're going to, again, simply sort this the way we want it. So again, sort first by type and then by item, and we're good to go. The next thing I want to show you is how to filter. Filtering is basically how to make it so that your data, you can select certain parts of your data. So what I mean by that is, let's just go ahead and do it and you'll see what I mean. I can select either the entire headers, all of the headers, or I can select a single header. It doesn't matter because it's going to apply this across all of the columns. And I'm going to click Filter. Now you see I get these little drop-down options, and it just tells me that it's showing all for each one of these, which is what we want. And now we could do all kinds of fun things. So for example, probably not useful for the item because we don't have multiples in the item column. This is really only good if you have multiple entries, multiple duplicate entries that you want to see just those duplicates in a list. So in this case, or if you wanted to see like all of them that start with 0 or something like that. What we want to do though here is we want to filter out just the fruit in this case. We want to keep the blank selected because that's where we have our total field. Ideally, we would probably have this separated out, but that's a whole other story. So let's go ahead and click this drop down. We're going to keep the blank selected, and we're going to not select vegetables or treats or dairy. A faster way to do this would be to just have unclicked select all, click your blanks, and click your fruit, and then say OK. Now, it's probably more than I had to throw at you, but we got there, so that's what matters. And now only the fruit is displaying, and it's still maintaining the alphabetical order, which is great. You can do that with any of these fields. So let's say I want all these to go back, and let's say I just want to see anything that costs $1. Show me only things that cost $1. And we've got apples, Pop-Tarts, and cucumbers, and they're fruit, treats, and veggies. So that's that. You can do all kinds of fun and interesting things with sorting and filtering and combinations thereof, and it really helps make your Excel experience that much more powerful. Again, I'm going to save this for next time so we can get into some other cool little tips and tricks. I hope I didn't throw too much at you, but if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments section, and I'd be happy to help you out. If you think that it would be better to do smaller chunks of information, I would certainly appreciate that feedback as well, rather than doing these longer tutorials. I understand it can be a lot of information, so just let me know what you think, and I will be happy to oblige. But that's going to do it for this episode, and I will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and take care.